Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Jakarta, Indonesia. Welcome and thank you for finding the time to attend the Asia Pacific Small Business Survey 2021-2022 webinar, proudly organized by the ASEAN Federation of Accountants or AFA and CPA Australia. My name is Aucky Pratama, Executive Director of AFA, and I will be your host today. On behalf of the organizers, it is certainly an honor for me to welcome you to this webinar organized as part of our ASEAN SMP webinar series. This is a series of webinars and discussions focusing on current topics relevant to particularly accountants in small and medium practices or SMPs and small and medium enterprises or SMEs, as well as those with interest on the topics. And today, we are expecting participants from jurisdictions in ASEAN. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, please allow me to highlight the following housekeeping matters. Please be reminded that all participants will be on listen-only mode during this session. And if you have questions, please submit your question by clicking on the Q&A panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. Please be sure to address your questions to all panelists. A link to complete a post-event survey and download the presentation slides will be provided after the webinar. So please complete the survey within 24 hours to secure your e-certificate of participation. And last but not least, please note that this webinar is being recorded. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, CPA Australia's 13th Annual Asia Pacific Small Business Survey 2021-2022 is an important source of current information aiming to help inform the decisions of small business owners, advisors, and policymakers. It provides valuable insights into the sector across 11 economies in Asia Pacific, including several ASEAN jurisdictions such as Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Vietnam. Today's webinar aims to provide you with a glimpse into the key findings of this survey. And we are pleased to welcome a panel of regional experts to discuss some of these key findings. And I look forward to introducing them to you later. For now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us begin our webinar with the first welcome address from AFA Deputy President, Dr. Doan Tien. Dr. Tien.
Leader and member of AFA and CPA Australia, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from Vietnam. On behalf of AFA, I am pleased to welcome you to our Insight webinar together with CPA Australia. Today's webinar is part of our ASEAN and Peace webinar series focusing our concern issues relevant to our stakeholders, particularly accountants in small business and practice. We recognize the important roles of ASEAN small business in supporting our regional growth. As backbone of our economies, small business in the region continue to deal with different challenges, especially in the last couple of years under COVID-19 pandemic. One key message that continue to come up throughout our discussion under the ASEAN SMP webinar series is an important role of accountant in small and medium practice or SMPs as partner and just advice for the small business. Together with our member organization, AFA continue to facilitate learning and sharing in the role to provide our accountant, including those in the LLP, opportunity to learning from the best and be updated in the next development of the profession. Ladies and gentlemen, today's webinar is an example of the learning and sharing opportunity. CPA Australia, with its understanding of the region as well as its expertise and resources, in an important factor of AFA in our region development and capacity building initiative. We recognize CPA Australia continuing support and important roles in the region. Our webinar today will look into some of the key and relevant findings from CPA Australia as the Pacific Small Business Saver 2021-2022. I am certain that many of the findings based on survey concluded in region in the region, including some in ASEAN, are relevant to small business in our region. It is a part of our annual and ongoing collaboration to keep you updated through insight into how small business in the region are dealing with current issue. The pandemic has without a double change the way we live and how business are operating. Some business have managed to take up on the opportunity to round display the changes that came with the pandemic. The important question is, what are the reasons or factors behind the subset or highest growth of this small business? I certainly hope within the next 19 minutes, we will get some answer from the sharing and discussion. I would urge you to use this opportunity to learn from our distinguished panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude by thanking once again our member organization and partner CPA Australia for the excellent collaboration. Also to thank our panelists for the time to be here with us today. I hope you will enjoy this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy President Tien, for your address. And I would like to emphasize one important point that you raised on the important role of accountants, in particularly the SMPs, as partners and trusted advisors for ASEAN small businesses. And today's sharing is an excellent opportunity, perhaps for accountants to understand the small businesses and their challenges better. Next, I would like to welcome the country head of Malaysia for CPA Australia, Ms. Priya Terumalay, to deliver her address. Priya.
Thank you, Aucky. Good afternoon, everyone. We are pleased to collaborate once again with the ASEAN Federation of Accountants to share the findings of CPA Australia's 13th annual survey of small business issues and sentiment. A key to the sustainability of members and CPA Australia lies in meeting the changing expectations of the community and the landscape that organizations operate in. We look to do this by conducting research into issues facing the profession, both by ourselves and with partners, supporting the development of the profession in underrepresented areas and partnering with other professional accounting bodies to advance the future of the profession. The Asia Pacific Small Business Survey is one of CPA Australia's policy and advocacy initiative as we advocate for the interests of our profession, members, and the public. Findings from this survey provide valuable insights into the sector across 11 economies in Australia, New Zealand, and Asia. From the commencement of the survey in 2009, we have surveyed over 35,000 small businesses across the region. And the findings for the latest survey come from 4,252 small businesses, where we share key takeaways and insights into the state of digital transformation, innovation, and resilience of small businesses, especially in the wake of the pandemic. CPA Australia recognizes the importance of supporting the accounting profession in the ASEAN region and the work of AFA in achieving this. As a member of AFA, CPA Australia is an active contributor to the discussions and activities that lend value to AFA members. And we're constantly looking for opportunities to collaborate in sharing best practices and also to identify potential speakers from amongst our membership who can contribute on topics of common interest. As careers become more mobile and as accountants need to be able to work across jurisdictions, it is important that we continue to build our partnership with accounting bodies, educational institutions, and other bodies representing the interests of the broader business community. We value our partnership with AFA that has been built on many years of mutual support, and we look forward to continuing our strong bond into the future. Thank you, Aucky.
And thank you, Priya, for that address. And AFA certainly recognizes CPA Australia's active role in the region and always appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with you. So we certainly look forward to continuing this excellent collaboration with CPA Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, I would like to invite our Deputy President, Dr. Tien, Priya, our presenter and panelists and guests to kindly turn on your video for a quick group photo. Okay, so if everyone can turn on your video, please, panelists. And on my 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's take another one. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, to start our discussion, let us first hear a presentation from Mr. Jonathan. So Jonathan is currently a policy advisor at CPA Australia and is involved in the delivery of policy, research, and advocacy outputs that builds and enhance the influence of CPA within the profession, governments, and across the broader community in Greater China and other parts of the Asia Pacific. Welcome, Jonathan. The next 30 minutes are yours.
Thank you, Aucky. Thank you, Aucky, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. Before I start the presentation, I would just like to give a quick introduction of what the policy and advocacy team, of which I am part of, at CPA Australia does. So as Priya mentioned earlier, we work very closely with the international team, for example, Priya and the team in Malaysia, to deliver thought leadership, policy, and advocacy outputs. So these would include engagement with governments, regulators. We do submissions, reports, surveys, white papers, and other publications that provide value, resources, and tools to our members, the accounting profession, and the community at large. And hopefully our thought leadership work would help you, your business, or your client's business. And so one of our main thought leadership work is our annual Asia Pacific Small Business Survey. As Priya said earlier, it's a longitudinal study with 13 years worth of data from 11 different markets, including 5 from ASEAN. So the survey was conducted at the end of last year, from November to December, and we surveyed small business owners or managers from companies with fewer than 20 employees. And we also made sure that the survey sample for each market broadly represents the industry profile of that particular market. And so in this edition of the survey, we interviewed over 300 small businesses in each of the 5 ASEAN markets, so Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Vietnam. And so I'll start off with business conditions last year, whether they grew or shrank, and the positive and negative factors impacting businesses in the Asia Pacific region. So as you can see, the past 2 years have been very tough for small businesses in the region. All markets registered a very significant drop in the percentage of businesses that grew in 2020 from 2019. So there were some improvements last year with a rebound in most markets, but no markets had recovered to pre-pandemic levels. So the thicker dotted line showed the performance of small businesses in the 5 ASEAN markets. Indonesia registered a strong rebound and is the top ranked market in terms of the proportion of businesses that grew. And Singapore and the Philippines reported slight improvements, and the Philippines is the second highest ranked market with around 2/3 reporting growth last year. And Malaysia and Vietnam were the ASEAN markets that did worse last year than in 2020. And I believe in both markets, COVID cases and COVID-related deaths shot up last year from 2020. And I think strict social restrictions were also imposed in Vietnam, and in Malaysia, I believe a full movement control order was imposed sometime during the summer last year. So obviously this would have contributed to the worsening of economic and business conditions. But having said that, both Malaysia and Vietnam did better than small business here in Hong Kong, Australia, and New Zealand. And this slide shows the data breakdown by growth. That's the green, remained unchanged, the gray, or shrank, the orange. And the yellow dotted box highlights the ASEAN markets surveyed. And so if we look at the total percentage of those that grew or were unchanged, actually a majority of small businesses fall under these 2 categories. And so if we put this into perspective, that's actually a good thing, because remaining unchanged during tough business conditions can be considered a positive. We also asked respondents about changes in staff numbers, and with the exception of India, Hong Kong, and New Zealand, India registered the highest percentage of small businesses that added employees. That's the yellow bar. All other markets did not meet expectations, which is the navy blue bar. And that's because fewer small businesses actually grew last year than was expected. And so this is reflected in the lower proportion of businesses that increased employees compared to expectations. And this is particularly so for Malaysia, so 16% compared to expected of 41%, and Vietnam, 16% compared to 42%. And this is likely because of a tough year, which I mentioned earlier. So this table shows the top 3 most selected positive factors on businesses by market. And as you can see, most ASEAN markets chose customer loyalty and improved customer satisfaction as the top positive factors. And so I would be very interested in what the other panel speakers would like to say about the sort of strategies that small businesses can employ to improve customer loyalty and satisfaction. And some of you may have also spotted COVID was chosen as the top key positive factor in Taiwan. So 38%, 38% chose COVID. And COVID was also a top 3 factor in Malaysia and Australia. And this is because small businesses in some sectors, such as the export-oriented and technology sectors, for example, manufacturing, transportation, and information technology, actually benefited from strong demand for things like delivery services, transportation, and electronic goods and devices. So small businesses in those industries actually benefited from the pandemic. So moving on to negative factors, Unsurprisingly, most markets chose COVID as their top negative factor, which is the same as in 2020. Vietnam and Indonesia were most impacted adversely, followed by Malaysia. And in the third row, China was the exception, as they managed COVID outbreaks relatively well last year. But we have definitely seen on the news the COVID situation worsened this year. Shanghai just recently got out of a full city lockdown. So I wouldn't be surprised if COVID became the most chosen negative factor again among small businesses in China this year. And increasing costs was also a widely chosen negative factor. And the survey results show that there was a large jump in the percentage of small businesses overall that found fuel and material costs to be detrimental to their business. And last year, this was most likely due to things like supply chain bottlenecks. And this year, the war in Ukraine has exacerbated this problem. So they pushed up fuel and commodity prices. So problem with increasing costs are likely to persist this year. And other negative factors include a poor overall economic environment, which is linked with the pandemic and increasing competition. And as I said before, last year, with the exception of China, COVID was a very significant negative influence among small businesses in the market surveyed, just like in 2020. And when we asked what small businesses did in response to the pandemic, began or increased focus on online sales was the most chosen action, followed by reduced capital expenditure, government support and subsidies, increased tech investment, and made changes to the products or services they sell. And this is the overall result. On the right-hand side, we can see that different markets focus on different actions. So amongst the Southeast Asian markets, Malaysia's small businesses were most likely to reduce the capital expenditure. Singapore was most likely to reduce capital expenditure and seek government grant and support. Vietnam focused on increasing investment in technology, and Indonesia and the Philippines were most likely to begin or increase the use of online sales. And some of these actions are actually associated with strong business growth, such as the focus on e-commerce and technology investment. And I'll elaborate further on this a little later. And when we dissect COVID actions by demographics, an interesting thing comes up. So small businesses with respondents aged 50 or above were a lot more likely than their younger counterparts to have taken no action in response to the pandemic. And this shot up to 38% for those aged 60 or above. And by business size, that's the right-hand side of the presentation, the smaller the company, the higher the percentage of businesses not taking any action. So the percentage goes up by a lot as we reach the really micro, the fewer than 5 employees, no employees end of the business size scale. The next section of the presentation looks at technology uptake among small businesses in the Asia Pacific region. So this graph looks at the percentage of small businesses that earned more than 10% of revenue online. And we can see that the overall trend has been rising. Mainland China has been a leader in this for a couple of years now. And if you look at India, online sales have shot up dramatically over the past 2 years. So if you look at the orange dotted box, the ASEAN markets generally do quite well in this. They're lower than China and India, but they do well compared to developed markets such as Australia and New Zealand. So Vietnam is the highest of the 5, with 73% of small businesses earning more than 10% of revenue online, followed by Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Singapore. And curiously, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Singapore actually registered a lower percentage last year than in 2020. While the survey average, that's the horizontal line, went up slightly from 58% to 61%. But it's still higher than the pre-pandemic 2019 levels. But this shows that there's definitely room for improvement in these three ASEAN markets. And that's because, as I will show later, e-commerce, online sales is a defining feature of high growth businesses. And this graph looks at the percentage of businesses that received more than 10% of sales through new payment technologies. And what I mean by new payment technologies are things like PayPal, Apple Pay. I think GrabPay is quite popular in Malaysia and Singapore. Alipay and WeChat Pay in mainland China. And I think GCash is popular in the Philippines and Momo in Vietnam. And so for the use of new payment technologies, again, China has been leading in this for a number of years now. And so it's actually very difficult to find a small business in China not using new payment technologies. And in this edition of the survey, only 0.1% of small businesses in mainland China said they do not offer such technologies last year. And in ASEAN, Vietnam leads again, followed by Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines. And Malaysia experienced the highest percentage increase of all the markets surveyed, but the percentage fell in the Philippines and Singapore. And so, like with e-commerce, there's also room for improvement for small businesses in ASEAN to increase their focus of new payment technologies. As again, this is another defining feature of high growth businesses. And this slide is on the percentage of businesses that receive most of the sales via cash. And the results show that while there has been an increase in the use of new payment technologies, there has also been a corresponding increase in cash transactions. So the survey average went up from 44% in 2019 to 50% in 2021. And this percentage is actually the highest on record in the history of the survey. So in markets like in Indonesia and the Philippines, a vast majority of small businesses still use cash. And actually, as you can see, both markets saw a rebound in the percentage last year from 2020. And in Vietnam, over to the right, this percentage increased significantly in the first year of COVID and then dropped again last year. So this is a very interesting phenomenon and appears to be quite counterintuitive. And in fact, one of our panel speakers, Michael, he recently wrote an op-ed article on this, and he calls it the Paradox of Banknotes. So I would be very interested in what Michael has to say about this later in the panel discussion. And this slide is on the use of social media for business purposes. And as you can see, a majority of small businesses used social media last year in all markets, including in Australia. And except for Singapore, all other ASEAN markets scored above the survey average. So Indonesia was the top ranked market with 93% using social media for business purposes. So that's the bright blue bar. And Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia all reported above 80% usage. And social media usage is important because it is a characteristic of growing businesses. So when we cross-analyze by business performance, we can see that the businesses that grew last year, that's the yellow bar, they were much more likely to have used social media than businesses that did not grow. That's the navy blue bar. For example, to promote their business to potential customers, to sell products or services, to learn about the behavior of customers, to receive or monitor customer feedback. And at the bottom of the graph, the results show that a much smaller percentage of businesses that grew did not use social media. compared to those that did not grow. So the lesson here is that if you are not already using social media for the business, you should start consider using it and start identifying the right social media platform for your business. And when we ask respondents on the impact of technology investment on profitability, Vietnamese small businesses were ranked first in the percentage that reported their tech investment resulted in improved business profitability. And India was the only market in which a majority stated that tech investment significantly improved profitability. Indonesia and the Philippines were also ranked high and above the survey average, while in Malaysia and Singapore, the percentages were below the average. And so with increasing technology adoption and increasing digital transformation comes greater cybersecurity threats. So India, Vietnam, and Indonesia were the top 3 markets that were most likely to expect a cyber attack this year. But funnily enough, they were also the 3 markets that could have done a little more in terms of cybersecurity protection. So ideally, the yellow bar, the percentage that reviewed the cybersecurity protections in the past 6 months, should be taller than the navy blue bar, which is expected cybersecurity attack. And this is because this shows that small businesses in those markets are taking cybersecurity seriously, and they are reviewing their cybersecurity measures on a regular basis. So for ASEAN, Indonesian and Vietnamese small businesses could do a little more in terms of cybersecurity, especially when their level of technology adoption is quite high. And when we talk about technology, we usually can't avoid talking about innovation as well. And innovation in this case doesn't mean completely reinventing the wheel. This could take the form of incremental innovation. So things like using a new sauce for your hot dog that you sell, or changing your product labeling. But these are also examples of innovation. And in general, we see that small businesses in developing markets were much more likely to expect to innovate this year compared to small businesses in developed markets. So India was ranked the highest with over 50% expecting to innovate this year, and the Philippines and Indonesia came second and third respectively. For the Philippines, the percentage expecting to innovate was the highest in the history of the survey for the Filipino market. And in Vietnam, the percentage decreased quite significantly from 2019. And this possibly reflects a relatively tougher economic and business conditions in that market over the past 2 years. And as I will present later, innovation is also another defining feature of high growth, of strong growth businesses. And it would be prudent for small businesses to look for ways to introduce new products, services, or processes to their local market or to international markets. So the next part is on small business expectations for 2022. And as you can see, growth expectations were mixed. The Philippines and Indonesia were the highest ranked markets in ASEAN, as well as the whole survey. And for Vietnam, despite a drop in growth expectations over the past 2 years, they were still the 3rd highest ranked market. And Malaysia and Singapore growth expectations were flat. And with the exception of Singapore, all other Southeast Asian markets reported a higher than average growth expectation. And the survey average is the gray dotted line. But I just want to warn that this survey was conducted last year in November and December, and so may not necessarily capture business outlook after COVID outbreaks in markets such as Indonesia, mainland China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong this year. And this survey also does not take into account the the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the impact it will have on small businesses here in Asia. So changes in headcount expectations were also mixed. So amongst these Southeast Asian markets, the Philippines had the highest percentage of businesses expecting to increase employee numbers, around 62%, followed by Indonesia and Vietnam. And this actually corresponds to growth expectations in the previous slide. And Singapore was the least likely of the ASEAN markets to expect to increase staff numbers, just like they were the least likely among the ASEAN markets to expect to grow. And this slide shows the percentage of small businesses expecting overseas sales to grow this year. Again, developing markets were much more likely to expect overseas sales to grow compared to developed markets. And it's very positive to see that many ASEAN small businesses are exporting, because expanding into new markets is one way of growing your business and diversifying your revenue streams. And it also exposes your business to competition and new ideas, and this will benefit the business in the long run. So the next section is on small business, their experience in accessing finance. We look at how easy or difficult it was to access finance, and the reason for seeking external finance, and the financing sources. So the survey average shows that overall, small businesses found accessing finance easy rather than difficult last year. But in ASEAN, only Vietnam and the Philippines experienced this. So the percentage of small businesses that found it easy to access finance in these two markets rose from 2020. But in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, they found it more difficult rather than easy. But having said that, fewer small businesses in Indonesia and Malaysia found it difficult to access external finance last year compared to in 2020. For Singapore small businesses, last year was a very difficult year for accessing finance. And that's because the percentage that found accessing finance easy dropped from 43% in 2020 to only 20% last year, while those small businesses that found it difficult increased from 34% to 47%. And reflecting tougher business conditions last year, small businesses were more likely to seek external finance for business survival. And the 49% on this graph is the highest in the history of the Asia Pacific Small Business Survey, so surpassing the previous record in 2020. And by market, Vietnamese small businesses had the highest percentage of businesses seeking finance for survival, 67% access finance for survival, and Singapore the least at 31%. But it's not all doom and gloom, as many also sought finance for business growth, although as you can see, the percentage wasn't as high as in the pre-pandemic era in 2019. And India small businesses were the most likely to seek external finance for business growth at 71%, followed by Indonesia at 60%. And New Zealand were the least likely. And as you can see, there were also increases for covering costs, such as covering increasing expenses, rental expenses, covering late payment from debtors, bank loan costs, and tax payments. And the top three sources of external finance overall were banks, friends of family, and personal resources. And in ASEAN, the most popular choice was a bank, with the exception of the Philippines, where friends of family was the most popular source of external finance. And so over to the expected need for finance this year. So overall, there's a higher percentage of businesses in high growth markets expecting to seek finance this year. And the exception here is Hong Kong, with more than 7 in 10 expecting to seek external finance. In Southeast Asia, Indonesia and Vietnam had the highest percentages, so that's over 90%, and Singapore was the lowest at around 53%. And the main reason for seeking finance this year is business growth in all markets, except for Hong Kong, New Zealand, and Vietnam. And they chose business survival as the most anticipated reason. So Indonesian small businesses were ranked first in expecting to seek finance for business growth, followed by India and Malaysia. And another frequently chosen reason is covering increasing costs, which ties back to what I said earlier about high inflation and increasing costs. And when we look at expected ease of seeking finance, we can see that many ASEAN small businesses believe that it will be more difficult than easy. Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia forecasted that external finance would be more difficult than easy, and Vietnam and the Philippines believe that it will be more easy than difficult. So the survey also looked at where small businesses in the Asia Pacific region sought business advice from. And so overall, friends or family were the most popular source of business advice last year. And this was the case in Malaysia, the Philippines, and Singapore. And it was the second most popular choice in Indonesia. And only in Vietnam at the bottom of the table was this not the most popular choice. It was the fourth most popular choice. And rather interestingly, small businesses don't really reach out to the government for professional advice. So overall, only 14% sought advice from the government. And for governments, the highest percentage is in Southeast Asia was Malaysia with only 16%, and the lowest was Vietnam with 9%. So again, I would be very interested in what the panel speakers would think about this. But having said that, reaching out to professional advice is a key characteristic of high growth businesses. So the graph here shows that small businesses that grew strongly last year were much more likely to have reached out to IT consultants and business consultants for advice. And on the flip side, at the bottom of this graph, we can see that nearly 1/4 of small businesses that did not grow did not seek external advice last year, compared to only 4% amongst those that grew strongly. And this is the last, and I think one of the most important section of my presentation. It looks at the defining features, the characteristics of high growth businesses in the Asia Pacific region over the past 2 years, so during the pandemic. So what did they do differently compared to businesses that did not grow? And hopefully you can gain some value and leverage on the results to support your business or your client's business. So among the strong growth businesses in 2020 and 2021, these were the top 4 actions they undertook in response to the pandemic. So high growth businesses were most likely to begin or increase their focus on online sales or e-commerce. They made changes to the products or services they sell, or they changed their business plan. And 1/4 of them also increased investment into technology. And you may want to know what sort of technology did they invest in that differentiated themselves from businesses that did not grow. And our survey results show that customer relationship management software, CRM, business intelligence, BI, and artificial intelligence, AI, were the technologies that high growth businesses were significantly more likely to have invested in compared to no growth businesses. And as I've mentioned throughout my presentation, high growth businesses were associated with greater adoption of technology and e-commerce. So the orange line here, it's not really a line, it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's an orange pentagon. This shows the businesses that grew strongly in the past 2 years. And the navy blue line, pentagon, shows businesses that did not grow. And high growth businesses were associated with a greater percentage of investment in technology that led to their business becoming more profitable. The use of online sales, the use of new payment technologies, they reviewed their cybersecurity protections, and they sought advice from IT consultants or specialists. So the lesson here is that there is a relationship between business performance and technology. So if you haven't already, I do encourage you to start looking at adopting e-commerce, new payment technologies, investing in technology such as CRM, business intelligence, artificial intelligence, or seek advice from your IT consultant or technician. And there's also a relationship between business performance and the focus on customer satisfaction and improving business strategy and management. So high growth businesses were much more likely to state that these are the following factors that positively impacted their business over the past 2 years. So the key lesson here is that small businesses should look at ways to improve their relationship with customers. They should look for ways to improve business efficiencies and improve relationship with your own staff, as well as obviously technology. And lastly, there's also a relationship between business performance and expectations to innovate and sell overseas. So on the left-hand side, 65% of small businesses that expect to grow strongly this year believe they will innovate, compared to only 12% that expect to not to grow. So it's a 53 percentage points difference. It's an enormous difference. And on the right-hand side, 73% of businesses that expect to grow strongly this year think overseas revenue will grow, compared to only 20% for businesses that do not expect to grow. Again, this is a very sizable difference. So therefore, small businesses, if applicable, they should look for opportunities to innovate and export. And so overall, and in summary, I guess, if we look at ASEAN small businesses, they do generally exhibit the characteristics associated with high growth businesses. So I'm personally quite hopeful that ASEAN small businesses would recover from more than 2 years of very tough economic and business conditions, and hopefully be well positioned and be well placed for long-term sustainable growth. And so this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you found the results interesting, insightful, and more importantly, helpful. And I'll hand back to Aucky. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Jonathan, for that comprehensive summary of the survey findings and for setting up the context for our discussion today. And I'm excited to discuss some of those points in further details with you and our panelists later. But before we do that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to again remind you to submit your questions through our Q&A panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. And please be sure to address your questions to all panelists. I can already see there's a question in the Q&A panel that I will be referring to later as well. So, okay, let us now dive deeper into some of these key findings that Jonathan has shared in his presentation with our distinguished panelists. Please allow me to first briefly introduce them and welcome them. First, we have Dr. Michael Schaper. So Michael has extensive experience in small business regulation, education, research, and advice. He is currently a senior visiting fellow at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, researching how SMEs are preparing for climate change. He authors or co-authors many publications, including the 2020 on-top review into competition law and SMEs. And Michael currently working with the ADB, looking at the role of SMEs in regional economic development in the Mekong River nations. And earlier this month, Michael was appointed to the board of the Small Business Development Corporation by the West Australian government. And in 2021, he was inducted into the International Council for Small Businesses list of distinguished global SME practitioners. Welcome, Michael. It is an honor to have you on the panel.
Thank you, Aucky, very much.
Okay, next we have Sonexay Silaphet. Sonexay is currently serving as president of the Laos Chamber of Commerce, Chamber of Professional Accountants and Auditors, or LCPAA, previously having served as its vice president from 2015 to 2022. Sonexay is a former president of AFA in 2016 and 2017, and prior to that, our deputy president in 2014 and 2015, representing LCPAA. Sonexay is the managing director of PSGC Laos Co Limited, partner and founder of SKNP Co Limited, and board member of the Bank pour le Commerce Exterior Laos Public and the Laos Development Bank, and a lecturer of Laos CPA at LCPAA. Sonexay has more than 16 years of professional experience as an auditor at PricewaterhouseCoopers and Ernst & Young in Laos PDR. Sonexay is also, of course, a CPA Australia member. Welcome, Sonexay.
Thank you, Aucky. Thank you.
Of course, in addition to Michael and Sonexay, we will also welcome back Jonathan to our panel. To kickstart our discussion, we've heard from Jonathan, obviously. So perhaps I would like to start with Michael and then Sonexay. Could you perhaps please briefly share with us your just brief observation of the state of small businesses in your region or jurisdictions? Especially after more than 2 years of challenging circumstances. Michael, perhaps you could speak from the perspective, I don't know, maybe Australia and maybe even a bit of Singapore, and Sonexay, of course, to give us that unique insight into the Laos PDR, a jurisdiction that is not included in the survey. Michael?
Thanks, Aucky. I think very much the picture that Jonathan paints is an accurate one in the sense that, first of all, SMEs are well placed to rebound. One of the things we do need to remember, of course, as we look at that, of course, the sobering note is that we do have a bit of survivor bias because, in effect, of course, there are a lot of businesses and we've never been able to quite get our handle on how many businesses went to the wall. And that's something we do need to remember. It's almost like the departed. But nonetheless, Jonathan's picture is quite correct. First of all, that those that are here and the new ones that are coming back are well placed to take advantage of it. The other element, you can see it very much in Australia, but you can see it right around the region, is that it is a tale of differing communities. Sometimes, that is to say, there are broadly, time and time again, Jonathan's slides showed patterns where there were almost two distinct threads running through. For example, earlier on, there was a mention about how do firms respond to COVID, and you found that regardless of country, very small businesses, older businesses weren't doing much, whereas newer ones were more active in responding to that. Likewise, in terms of innovation, we found that particular countries tended to be more active than others. Some reported a much higher rate, and countries like Australia reported a much lower rate. So there is a tale of two cities going on here. Sometimes it's between mature, probably more advanced economies and those that are still developing. Sometimes it's between firms of different age and inclination as well. So we do need to remember, I think a very important thing is that often there's no universal answer to what fronts up and what confronts SMEs here as well. So finally, the survey is a really good reminder that one of the things about the SME sector is it is just as diverse within itself as it is outside. When we talk about small businesses, we are talking about many, many millions of businesses and many different ways to deal with the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and I agree. And I think it's certainly encouraging to see and hear the optimism from these small businesses as well. Sonexay.
Yeah, thank you, Aucky. I just would like to share with you on the perspective of the Laos PDR, where we also not participate on this survey. But of course, I mean, I can see a lot of finding that Jonathan has been raised. I mean, that very valid to the Laopedia as well. If I look back, I mean, a few years ago, right, I've been starting from end of 2019, coming back to mid 2022, almost like 3 years. We can see that, I mean, most of the business in Laopedia are also affected, I mean, and facing a very challenging, I mean, period. In Laopedia, we can see the government, I mean, because due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the government locked down the country, the government locked down the city, and then people limited, I mean, restriction, people move, and most of the business are closed, not be able to provide a service or activity. I think most of them facing very difficulty, and in terms of revenue generation and so on. I mean, to make the business survive, of course, I mean, they will starting from reducing number of staff, reducing, I mean, salary, and also, you know, and seriously until close down the business and so on. I mean, those very difficulty, but of course, from those difficulty period, we can see some of the small business, I mean, adjusting or change their business strategy and structure. They use the platform, I mean, social platform, to do the business. We can see, I mean, some of them, I mean, go online sale, do Facebook live or advertising, I mean, in Facebook, using WhatsApp or live group, or change the way of communication from face to face, and then using the technology like, I mean, have online meeting by Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google Meet or whatever. They use those kind of technology, I mean, to helping to make the business slowly recover and generate revenue, and then make it more about slowly recover and then can continue. We can see, I mean, those development from the small business perspective and how they survive and moving forward on the difficult period of time in Laopedia. Yep. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Xuan. I think it's certainly good as well to see some consistencies between some of the survey findings and the what's happening in Laopedia with small business in Laopedia. And I would like to pick up well, one very important thing that Sonexay keep referring to is the use of different technologies or innovations that's also used by small business in Laopedia. I mean, this is something that is highlighted by Jonathan in his presentation as well. And I think in his presentation, Jonathan highlighted two of the most common features among these high growth small business survey are innovation and increasing use of technology. I mean, including likelihood to selling online, receiving payments through new payment technologies, using social media. Ms. Sonexay, you mentioned Facebook, for example. I mean, a variety of ways to promote, to sell. But however, the survey results show that, well, for many businesses in Southeast Asia in particular, especially the 5 countries surveyed in the ASEAN region, they remain firmly wedded to using cash. I mean, Jonathan even referred to an article that you wrote, Michael, where you mentioned about the paradox of banknotes. I mean, I would like to perhaps hear from, well, first Michael and then Sonexay. I mean, do you think this is good or bad? I mean, your observation on this, please. Michael?
Look, it's a very interesting and very curious situation that no one can quite understand. One of the European central banks was asked, why are we still printing more banknotes than ever before, even as more and more businesses and consumers are going online? And their answer was, because we are printing more. They basically had they couldn't basically come up with an answer for it. So Jonathan's results make it really clear here that we have some really unusual trends. One of the ones that struck me, for example, was Vietnam, where the movement was almost counterintuitive. More cash was used when lockdowns were in place, and then when lockdowns were removed, less cash was used, and you would think it would be the other way around. And there are similar quirks and unusual patterns in a whole variety of countries. The paradox of banknotes is a phenomena that has been going on well before COVID over the last decade, where countries are producing more banknotes, even as more business is being done digitally. And in our region, perhaps the most spectacular example is Japan, where year on year, more than 5% banknotes keep growing by 5%, even though the Japanese are famously very good adopters of new technology. And likewise for Singapore, which has a very highly digitalized economy as well. So it might be a cultural, it might be a lack of understanding about how to best use systems. It might be also the issue, which we're going to touch on in a minute, about cybersecurity. I think that is a real danger, and maybe we can come back to that one, Aucky, but small businesses are some of the most high-risk proposals when it comes to online scams. And in fact, it's far easier to scam a small business than a big business. And so it is a real present danger for us there. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, we know cash is still really valued by a lot of consumers. It will be interesting as we move into a high inflation environment, as much of the world is already starting to do, what changes in behaviour that has as well. I suspect that it will make things somewhat more difficult, but using cash is more expensive and is more handling. And I think there's a role here for the accounting profession. If accountants can give their business clients, their small businesses, a solution that is easy for them to use, then I think not only is that valuable to your small business clients, but it's also moving into the realm of management accounting and being the trusted advisor. And I think there's a really important role for a lot of smaller operators. I don't know how this works. I don't know what digital technologies to use. I'm not familiar with how this works. It's how the client might see it. And so there is a really obvious role there for the accountant as trusted partner to a business to step forward and say, I've got the experience, I've looked at different options, and this is probably the best one for your business, and I'll help you, I'll work with you to get it in place. So I think that can be a win-win for the economy, for the individual SME, and certainly for the accounting practice as well.
Yeah, it is certainly odd, isn't it? I mean, personally, especially during the last couple of years under COVID, where you are encouraged to go cashless, where you are trying to limit touching things, especially cash. So to get this kind of a insight. So it does raise some questions. I mean, in terms of what is actually happening. So, and thank you for sharing your insights into that, Michael. But perhaps let us hear from Sonexay. Is it something that is also consistent with the situation in Lao PDR? I mean, are people still using cash? Is cash still king, or are you starting to see more use of digital platform for payment? I mean, then do you think this is a good thing or bad thing?
Okay, thanks, Aucky. I still confirm that. I mean, in Lao PDR, we still using more cash. I mean, the survey finding and also the research, the article, I think is valid point. I mean, in the situation of Lao PDR, in terms of using cash, whether it's good or bad thing, I think from my perspective, I think it depends on where we are. I mean, in terms of the countries developing in terms of technology and so on. So I can share with you. I mean, from the Lao perspective, I mean, I can say our culture is using cash. I mean, from at the beginning of long times ago, and then nowadays is more technology, more advanced, and using some digital payment through the bank. I mean, launching by the bank, for example, like BCL. I mean, they have BCL1 for settlement the payment by digital. But again, I mean, those things only can be, I mean, settlement in the large city, the big city like Vientiane capital itself, and or the second largest province like Luang Prabang, Savannakhet or Champasak and other provinces as well. Because of the limitation of the partner or where they are using digital transfer and so on. But of course, for the convenience, for the convenience of using, whenever they want to use, and then they prefer to use the cash. I think it's more on like psychology for themselves, it's more convenient for themselves to use the cash. But I can see, from now on, thing has been changed. We can see because of the COVID, and then people get used to it online, and online meeting, online sale, online payment. Right now, seems to I think from now and going forward, we can see that like big city like Vientiane and other big city in Lapid, they like to make a digital payment by like BCL1 and so on. It's more transaction incur at the moment. To settle the payment. But still, again, it depends on it's more on the convenient use. In some area, we still need to use cash. But of course, if we can do the digital payment, will be very good, because those things is very secure transaction. Is more it's good for the customer as well, because it's more safety for them. It also will support the business if they can do the settlement by digital payment. Is quite, I think, one of the factors that will be helping for them to make the business grow, and in terms of on those digital payment. Okay.
Yes, and that makes sense, Sonexay. And but you mentioned online everything. People is I think now more than ever people are we are now connected to many different things between us as well. And Michael, you mentioned something about cybersecurity. Of course, there's a different perspective to all of this, which is the security or cybersecurity threats. Of course, small business would like to consider these opportunities, to consider these different innovations, look at these different digital platforms, but they also need to consider, or they need to understand rather the potential threats and risks that are associated with this the different digital platforms. What will be your advice to these small businesses who are looking to improve their cybersecurity, but perhaps may not know to start?
Yeah. Look, traditionally, of course, the major form of fraud or loss used to be someone playing around with the books, and it was classically that was the sort of event that an audit or even just a professional outside accountant could more easily pick up than perhaps a busy business owner manager. Today, cybersecurity is not only a clear and present necessity, but the risk factor is extraordinarily high. We've done some research into this in the past, and small businesses stand out because, first of all, they have very poor security systems. Second, they usually don't have notion about security in and of themselves. If you're a small business of 5 or 6 people, it's not, you don't have a specialist in cybersecurity. You have to hope that your system works. They don't tend to upgrade systems, and often when fraudulent transactions are put through, phishing attempts, fake bank details, fake invoices, people tend to either pay them and be done with them rather than cross-check them as well. So what can we do? A clear point, apart from using professional services like accountants, are talking to other businesses. We find that industry associations, and Sonexay may well have a good idea of this one as well. Typically, business people like to get advice from other business people, and so they'll often ask their colleagues, where do you go, what do you do? They will also, but there are other ways in which you can also improve your security. So apart from bringing in an outside consultant, but that can be expensive, talking to other businesses, talking to your accountant. One of the other ones is also, interestingly enough, to talk to your own staff, because your own employees will often be at the front line and know where the gaps are and often able to identify them. So that's a really important one to look at. Governments do offer advice in cybersecurity. I think more businesses should try to take it up if they get the opportunity, because it is an issue governments are becoming increasingly aware of and concerned about as well.
Thank you, Michael. Jonathan, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, thank you, Aucky. And I just want to add on what Michael said earlier. I think it's also about raising cybersecurity awareness among your own staff. As Michael just said, the staff are essentially the frontline defense against cybersecurity attacks. So here at CPA Australia, I know we're not a small business, but the concept or the idea is the same. We have regular cybersecurity training workshops. So we learn how to identify phishing scams, fake emails, fake email addresses, and really simple things like keeping your desk tidy or updating your passwords regularly or making long passwords or enabling two-factor authentication. So simple things, but they do help. And at CPA Australia, we have a ton of cybersecurity resources. So they're all completely free and they're publicly available on our website. So yeah, please do have a look at our cybersecurity webpage.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. And yes, I do agree with that. Perhaps everyone who's in the audience today do check on that and go to the CPA Australia's website to check on some of those resources. Michael, I would like to pick up something that you just mentioned in your last responses. I mean, you mentioned about the government's advice, but the survey actually shows that governments remains one of the least used source of business advice, right? I mean, given the enormous amount of public funds or efforts that is spent on governments to disseminate information to SMEs, I mean, do we need to rethink how information is disseminated?
I think we do. This is not a problem unique to ASEAN or to just the surveyed countries. Whether we look at the United Kingdom, whether we look at Western Europe, whether we look at the United States, which are the countries that generate most of the research that we know about how small businesses behave, time and again we find it's almost universal that government tends to be one of the lowest ranking. 10 to 20% might be a really good figure in terms of usage. Friends and family are the most common ones, and business peers, which is why industry associations are really quite important. The internet by itself is also seen as just a source of advice, and that's a bit of a danger because it's a bit like when you feel sick and you try and diagnose yourself looking on the internet. It's probably going to produce entirely the wrong results. Again, what we do find is that the most trusted advisor tends to be the accountant, which is good for the profession, although it does create problems. And I'm sure much of the audience are familiar with the problem of clients coming in and asking you about subjects of which, as an accountant, you know next to nothing about, but because you are effectively almost like their GP, their doctor, this is your first port of call. So that can work to advantage. Governments have to get smarter. They have to speak the language of small business. A lot of government information is hard to find, is very generalised, is not well explained, is often in bureaucratic language. And we need to remember also that business people still want to be able to talk to as well as go online. So whether it be on a telephone, whether it be face-to-face, we find that there are a number of countries that do that really well. Malaysia has the SME Corporation, for example, with a number of offices. In the Philippines, there are the Negocio centres. In Thailand, the Office of SME Promotion has more than 30 one-stop shops around. And there are a number in other countries. Vietnam has a much smaller number of TACs, advisory centres. So we could expand those, but we've got to talk to businesses. And that means we've also got to ensure that business people actually have an input into how those organisations run. That's a big issue. And I think it's one where industry associations and chambers of commerce, business groups have a really important role to play.
Yes, agree with that, Michael. Well, Sonexay, let me just add to that question, I mean, look at it from a different perspective, which is the profession's perspective, Sonexay. So you being the, not well now, the president of LCPA, you're also former president of AFA, so you do have that a regional experience and perspective as well. I mean, one of the key messages that the profession has been advocating is our role as a partner or advisor to particularly small businesses, right? I mean, but as highlighted by the survey, I mean, many of the ASEAN small businesses are most likely to get their advice from family and friends, especially those surveyed in the ASEAN jurisdiction. I mean, why do you think that's the case? I mean, and perhaps the more important question is, what should we do better I guess to put the profession in a better positions to be the trusted partners or trusted advisors rather for these small businesses.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's very valid point. I mean, coming from the survey finding, because I think most of the small business, I mean, their cross people is that they trust mostly like their friend or family. Of course, they want to consult with those, I mean, friend and family about the issue and so on, how to run the business, how to solve the problem, I mean, with the business and so on. But I think in terms of professional, where we could do better, I mean, to support them, because we are professional firm that provide the quality and also professional service to them. So we need to make them more trust partner and give a better advice. I could share with you, like in Lao PDR, what we do. Like I can share with you, I mean, the situation in Lao PDR is we still have very much, I mean, more than like 14,000, I mean, small business entity that they running a business, but doesn't have a proper, like, for example, on accounting, doesn't have a proper accounting book maintained, cannot generate the financial statement, cannot access to the finance, I mean, with the bank and so on, because they have no proper, I mean, financial statement has been maintained, no business plan, I mean, and so on and so on. So it's very difficult for them to access to the finance. So what could we do better right now? Lao Chamber of Professional Accountants and Auditors work together with accounting regulatory department, I mean, to support the small, I mean, SME for not do a proper accounting book maintain, cannot generate a financial statement, and also not paying the tax based on the obligation and so on. Cannot prepare the business plan, cannot access to the finance and so on. So we work with accounting regulatory department to be the financial advisor, and also to be accountant to support the small business, to providing the training in terms of capacity building, to guide them how to do the double entry, how to do the how to prepare the financial statement, how to prepare the business plan, and so on. I mean, what can we do? But of course, it will take time. I mean, it will take time because to change the mindset from like family environment, business environment to be a proper, it may take some time, some time. But in terms of professional body, we produce a quality accountant. We have more qualified accountant to support to the market, and then we working with the regulatory, I mean, like accounting regulatory department, and then to support the business in terms of those things. This is I only can say from the Lao perspective that what we are doing at the moment, I mean, to support the small business. Yes.
Yes, and thank you, Sonexay. I think that cooperation between the PEOs, which is LCPA, and the government, it is something that can work in this kind of situation, and then that it's also, I think, something that many of the other PEOs in the region also is doing to try to establish that stronger collaboration with their government counterparts, right? Okay, for the next one, let me just use this opportunity to refer to a question coming from one of our audience through the Q&A function. And I would like to briefly perhaps, I would like to briefly hear from all three panelists. Maybe let's go to Sonexay first, and then Michael, and then finally Jonathan. So the question is, The survey seems to identify customer loyalty and satisfaction as key positive factors for small businesses. So what could they, or they being, I think, small businesses, do better to improve relationship with customers, especially in such a fastly changing environment? Let us start with Sonexay, Michael, and then Jonathan. Sonexay?
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think the they can consider use a social platform. I mean, it's a very simple one, like Facebook to connect with people, with friends, and then also customer. They can use WhatsApp group or Line group to maintain, I mean, the communication with customer, and also to provide the marketing tool, advertising, promotion, and so on, even the communication. I think we can use those very simple one and very cheap, and we are mostly using in our daily life. I mean, and not expensive at all, and not very concerned about cyber security and so on. So we can starting using from this, like set up a customer with like group, WhatsApp group, or Facebook, and then continue communicate with them regularly, provide, I mean, the information in terms of promotion or in terms of product or service that we have. And then, on the special event, for example, their birthday or whatever, send a special thanks note. I mean, by digital, by SMS, or by WhatsApp, or by Line, or in Facebook. I think if we keep continue doing a small thing, but regularly and continue do it consistently, it will helping the business to maintain a customer loyalty and with them, I think, in future. Yeah.
Yeah, so using the readily available social media or communication platform. Yeah, Sonexay. Michael?
Well, Sonexay, I think, spelled out really clearly what you need to do. Well done. In terms of what we have in terms of contemporary tools. There is perhaps a bigger issue that a small business operator needs to think about, and that is, do you go wide and large? Do you try and keep a very large number of clients and customers? And Sonexay has spelled out really cleverly some of the different tools that you can use. For some businesses, of course, it may be a matter of getting closer to a smaller group of customers. It depends on your industry. If you're running a store or a retail operation, you need a lot of customers. But in many other fields, it may be a smarter strategy to go, I'm going to develop a deeper, better, richer, self-reinforcing relationship with a smaller group of critical customers that might account for most of my work. So that's the other one. That's a big strategy that I think a lot of operators simply go, more customers are always better. But as we know, that's not always the case. If you were in some areas, yes, and you've got a lot of tools to do it now. And in some other areas, it might be a matter of going, perhaps you need to do the opposite and go smaller and lock yourself into a closer working relationship with a smaller group of customers. That's the other one as well. So they're complementary, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point, Michael. Jonathan?
Thank you, Aucky. I think it's also about understanding your customer. I mentioned this briefly in my presentation, but the high growth businesses were much more likely to have invested in customer relationship management software than those that did not grow. So CRM is a tool that enables you to track your business's interaction with your customer, what did they do, what their preference, and based off the data, you'll be able to find ways and strategies to probably enhance customer loyalty and satisfaction.
Yes, that's right, Jonathan. Michael, I mean, let us go to another aspect of the presentation. It's about the cost part of the discussion. I mean, well, obviously, aside from COVID, which has been identified by many of the jurisdictions as the main factors of the affecting the businesses, but increasing cost is also a major negative factor. So, I mean, if you could provide an advice to small businesses, I mean, what could they do to manage through what is now a high cost environment, Michael?
I made that point earlier, thank you, Aucky, about we are, at least for most countries, we look like we're about to enter a high inflation or a much greater inflation level than we have been used to. So in some respects, inflation is a real challenge because most of today's business operators are not used to dealing in high inflation environments because it's been at bay for, well, you know, for not 10 years, but closer to 2 decades for most countries. So that involves things such as looking at your long-term contracts. Can you lock them in at a price? It involves looking at what your gross and your net margins are, and are they optimized? Obviously, looking at not only your cost structure, but also things such as what's your level of borrowings and can that be reduced? Is that perhaps a smarter strategy? And much of Asia, of course, especially international cross-border work is done between currencies. So do you have a hedging or a planning strategy? Do you deal in a local currency or in an international denomination like the good old greenback? Have you thought about that? I noticed in some of Jonathan's slides that there was still a large number of businesses that were effectively borrowing to meet survival, and they're the businesses that are going to have challenges. I think we've got to also remember that there is a group of businesses that have survived but have come out of COVID with a bigger debt burden. Many governments, for example, helped small businesses not by giving them grants, but by deferring loans or putting them in low interest. So the debt is still there, and that has got to be paid off sooner or later. So I think many of our businesses, cash will be king, and liquidity will be a really important issue. And perhaps now is the time to start making those moves rather than waiting until the full effects of inflation have flown all the way through.
Yes, and of course, small business can go to their accountant as well to get helps in terms of looking at all of those different things, right? So that's a good opportunity as well for the accountants in the audience right now. So
that's what your accountant is for.
Yeah,
That's what your accountant is for.
Okay, I'm aware of the time, but I would like to perhaps slightly shift our discussion from the survey, Jonathan, Michael, and Sonexay, if I may, because I think this is something that has been of a priorities of many organizations, including AFA. Actually, one of our priorities for this year is actually on sustainability matters. So we have our sustainability agenda for 2022, looking at different aspects of sustainability, be it reporting, assurance, all other different things that we believe the accountants in the region need to know. And there are a lot of new things for the profession, obviously, when looking at this different things under the big umbrella of sustainability. You can consider climate change as an example of that. So I would like to perhaps get your thoughts on this. I mean, Michael, I mean, but what is your observation, I mean, of small ASEAN small businesses awareness towards these issues? I mean, if you use climate change as an example, I mean, are they aware of climate change and its potential impact to their business? I mean, are they doing enough to prepare for example, extreme weather events or natural disasters, you think?
We've just done a survey of some 800 businesses around ASEAN, and the answers are, interestingly, countries are more concerned. Some countries are more concerned than others. The Philippines, which has received a lot of typhoons and a lot of flooding. Malaysia, which has had some pretty once-in-a-lifetime flooding events in the last year or so, late last year, are much more concerned about it. Curiously, Singapore is probably, SMEs seem much less concerned, even though Singapore is a low-lying island and is right in the face of rising sea levels. It's not just Jakarta and Bangkok. And of course, in the Mekong region, it is, Sonexay will well know, of course, it's issues such as, you know, the whole river system there is at risk, and what the impact will be on, for example, Tonle Sap is yet to be seen. So there are some major challenges there. Businesses are concerned. They don't quite know what to do. They don't know where to find the information. They want simple, straightforward solutions, not highly sophisticated, complex ones. The smaller the business, the more important it is to give them practical steps rather than highly complex, expensive ones. So they lack the money, the time and the knowledge to deal with it. When we ask them about stream of weather events, most of them have been thinking a little bit about their insurance. The other area some of them are starting to think about is physically, am I located in the right place, and what happens if my business premises is destroyed or damaged? So again, there is a clear role here in the profession to provide frontline advice, access to the right sort of insurance policies, help them think in their business plan about whether they location, product, customers, and finally also come back to government support if there is assistance to actually, I think they're probably going to look to their accountant to help them work out, or their industry body, how to actually access it, because they probably can't find it themselves. So there's a clear role, plenty of room here for accountants to add, and in terms of management accounting, dealing with climate change is an area we don't tend to think about as management accounting, but I think it is for a lot of small businesses. Just a thought.
Yes, I agree, completely agree that, Michael. I mean, Sonexay, can you please share perhaps your insights into, well, what's the awareness of the small business in Lao PDR in some of this issue?
Okay. In Lao PDR, I think the government take very serious action on it as well. Especially, I mean, in Lao we have more hydropower dam, right? And then we can see it's more on hydropower dam. Of course, I mean it's the government very concerned about it in terms of dam safety, in terms of I mean social impact, in terms of environment impact as well. If we're looking at the overall environment for the regulatory framework in Laos to control on this. From the government perspective, they issue the regulation about, of course, when we develop the dam and or other non-mining or whatever, it has impact on the climate change and so on. So we need to have what we call is a social assessment report, how it impacted the society and how to, respond to those. And also environment assessment report as well, how to impact on the environment, how to respond to those impact and so on. Government will keep eye on this very closely, and the developer need to hire the consultant, I mean, to do the assessment and so on, and then present to the government on the ministry line and so on before they grant it, before the government granted the CA concession agreement. Of course, it's really long process. I mean, long process on this internally with the government, as well as depend on where the dam has been developed. If whether in the small river or stream or on the main Mekong River. But of course, in the main Mekong River, they need to go through MRC, Mekong River Commission as well. Within the Mekong River Commission itself, it has very strict policy need to follow and so on in terms of dam safety, in terms of flood, in terms of earthquake, in terms of risk. So many things on that need to be gone through on those. Not only for that, if you look at even the lender, right? Lender also, before they granted the loan, I mean, for the construction and so on, they have certain criteria and conditions need to follow to fulfill the requirement. We can see that as overall, those things is very important. I mean, very important. And then every step need to do very properly and clearly, and need to be safety. No need to think about commercial and also the technical part as well, on other things. Yeah, that's what.
Yes, thank you, Sonexay. I mean, Jonathan, obviously there's a need for I guess information, opportunity for learning as well, resources for accountants and well stakeholders in the region to know more about this. I mean, maybe the CPA Australia has initiative or maybe publication or resources in this space that you could share with us.
Yes, thanks, Aucky. Yes, we do have several publications in this space. So we have a report on climate change and financial reporting, which looks at climate-related issues for accountants and help accountants build their expertise and knowledge on this. Last year, we collaborated with the Xiamen National Accounting Institute in China on a white paper on the development of ESG reporting in 5 Asia-Pacific economies. And also we have a ton of webinar recordings on our YouTube channel on climate change, as well as a lot of articles on our monthly magazine, In the Black. And at CPA Australia, we are also committed to net zero. We signed a net zero commitment last year with 13 other professional accounting bodies to commit to net zero greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes, and thank you, Jonathan. It's good to hear that again, everybody. Everyone, if you want to, I will urge you to go to CPA Australia's website to access those different resources. Okay, so to wrap up our discussion this afternoon, perhaps one final question, one concluding question I would like to ask all the panelists. Maybe I can start with, well, Sonexay first, and then I can go to Jonathan, and then last but not least to Michael. I mean, if you could give your one advice for the ASEAN small businesses in their recovery journey, what would that be? Sonexay?
Yeah, I still, I mean, in the recommendation of Jonathan present just now is very, I mean, very good recommendation that could share, like, the small business could perhaps, I mean, look for, I mean, how to increase on the online sale to generate the revenue, how to invest on the technology, to cover the market, not only in the domestic itself, but for neighboring country and so on. They to increase in terms of revenue, and also they need to develop themselves in terms of provide a quality service or product to client for the customer satisfaction, and also for the loyalty, to maintain the loyalty of the customer. And also, of course, we can see that from the pandemic, the business model has been changed and so on. If necessarily, they need to revisit the business model and structure and modify or structure where it's important for them. I think I still need to follow the message of Jonathan has been presented. I think that's very good recommendation and valid point. And in terms of big picture, yeah, that's what I would like to add on. Thank you.
Sonexay. And perhaps you forget one more thing. You just go to your accountants to go through all of those things.
yes. That's very important now.
Jonathan?
To provide the service.
Yes.
I just want to make use of a quote attributed to Winston Churchill, and he said, "We should never waste a good crisis." Right. So the past 2 years have been very tough for small businesses around the world, but this means that there are also a lot of opportunities. So more customers are online. They're demanding more personalized services and products, and this means that small businesses should keep abreast of these changes and grasp the opportunities for recovery and growth. And so, as Sonexay said, please do have a look at our Asia Pacific Small Business Survey, and maybe you can be able to find bits and pieces here and there to help your business grow.
Thank you, Jonathan. Excellent message. Michael, last but not least.
Look, being in business for yourself, running your own small business, being a small business operator is still a great thing to do. It is still one of the best career choices so many people can make. What this survey does is show you some of the rules, some of the playbooks, some of the tools, and some of the approaches that the really successful businesses are adopting. And so I would say to a small business operator, the survey results, the emphasis on, as Jonathan just pointed out, areas like innovation, customers, adopting new technology is a great indicator for those that are actually in business. For those of us who advise businesses, I think it's really useful tool to show that there is still plenty where we can add value, because one thing that COVID has done is also shown the rest of the world just how important small businesses are. And I think there's a lot more appreciation for that. So if you've got a dream, go out and grab it.
Excellent, excellent, excellent messages to wrap up our discussion this afternoon. So, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. I'm sure plenty of important takeaways that we can take from Jonathan's presentation, definitely, but also from our panel discussion. And I will urge you to go again and visit CPA Australia's website to download the full survey report and all of the other resources that Jonathan has shared and mentioned with us, especially during the discussion. I certainly hope that you find this sharing and discussion useful. I mean, for those of you asking about the recording of the session, we will keep you posted. So make sure that you are following our social media to get the latest updates. And on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank once again, well, First Deputy President Dr. Doan Tien of ALPHA, Ms. Priya Terumalay of CPA Australia, our presenter, of course, Mr. Jonathan Ng, and our panelist, Dr. Michael Schaper of the ISEAS Yusof Institute in Singapore, and last but not least, Mr. Sonexay Silaphet of LCPAA. Thank you. We appreciate your time and your generosity in sharing your experience and knowledge with the audience today. And I would also like to thank everyone for participating today. I hope you have gained valuable information from our speakers and our panelists. My name is Aucky Pratama of ALPHA. Stay safe, take care, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.